Welcome to Off the Cuff with Kel, Conversations from the Front Line, a podcast and live show for survivors and the leaders who support them. I'm your host, Kelly Humphries, a survivor of child sexual abuse, advocate, author, speaker, ambassador, a lover of all things outdoors, with over 15 years of law enforcement experience. Please support me in my mission to break cycles of abuse and trauma. You can help by donating to my Patreon account at patreon.com/Kelly Humphries. Hey guys, hello, welcome to episode number 17 of Off the Cuff with Kel. I am so excited. We have the amazing Caroline Brunne, or Brunne. How do I say your last name, Caroline?
It's Brunne.
Brunne. Oh God, I got it completely wrong. Oh guys, you're in for a bit of a treat tonight. I'm a little bit special, so it's going to be really interesting. But Caroline and I have had a great chat this week, so I know it's going to be beautiful, lighthearted, but very deeply personal conversation, I think. And I'm a little bit excited, a little bit kind of, I think, trepidatious. I just made that word up. I'm not sure it's a word.
Trepidatious.
Oh, look, I'll have to ask Siri later.
It is a word. And you've definitely used it right.
Okay, good. my partner will be very proud of me. But yeah, I'm so very excited to have this conversation. But just a really quick note, guys, if you haven't listened before, we will be discussing themes of child sexual abuse. So it's a bit of a trigger warning for you. There are numbers on my website at kellyhumphries.com if you need someone to talk to or you need some support as a result of our conversation. But Caroline, welcome. Thank you so much. I know you've jumped in at the last minute and you're taking a dive into the deep end. Thank you for being here.
My absolute pleasure. I'm so glad you reached out. I think sometimes we end up exactly where we're supposed to be. So maybe today was the day I was supposed to chat to you.
Oh, man, you're a sister from another mister. Like that's like I am so. I know people kind of think I'm a bit woo-woo sometimes, but I'm totally fatalistic and totally about like synergistic connection and like divine like intervention and like people coming along your path at the right time for the right reason. So I freaking love it. It's so good. I'm so excited. All right, tell us about you. Let's just get into it. Let's go you.
So it's always really funny because I know in promoting tonight's chat, you kind of, which is in my bio, but you rattled off all the things, and I was like, yeah, right. Maybe sometimes I'm like, do I need to take some of these things out? But the reality is, like, I really can't. So I am a lot of things, and I know we're going to be talking about more than one thing being true, and a few other things tonight. But yeah, I am lots of things. I wear many hats. So I am an entrepreneur. So I run a completely separate business to this advocacy work that I do, but I do work in the advocacy space as a speaker and lived experience contributor. I'm also a survivor coach. So I work as a life coach specifically for people who have experienced trauma and want to set goals beyond that point in their life. In addition to that, on the side, I am also a model. So I've been modeling now on and off for most of my life, but more recently for the last kind of 6 or 7 years. I'm an author. I self-published my memoir last year. What else do I do? I'm also a mum. So I have a nearly 19-year-old and an 11-year-old. So
wow.
So that also keeps me busy. But I think that's most of my hats. That's most of the things I do.
That's a lot of hats, so my friend, especially with teenagers.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So tell us a bit about how you manage all those hats. Like,
well, my other business is I run a lifestyle management business, which is all around helping people get organized, manage their mental load, and tackle their to-do lists. So I not only teach people how to do that, but as a business, we offer that as a service. So we take your to-do list and we do it for you. So that's a whole nother business that I run, that I launched over 6 years ago now. So I've got a wonderful team that essentially keep that running for me. I am the face of the business and the founder, but as my role in advocacy and my survivor coaching has grown, I have been stepping more and more into that space. But yeah, that's how I do it. Like I practice what I preach in that space. I'm also really big on making sure that I block out time for the things that are important to me. So I'm all about that self-care. People assume that because there's so many things on that, titles or hats or whatever, that I must be really busy all the time and never have, but I rest a lot, and I go to the gym and I walk my dog, and I do all the other things that I really love. And because I fuel myself, that gives me the capacity to be able to intentionally go in and do the things I want to do that make a difference, and then take time off and rest and recover when I need to.
I have so many things already in my head, because they're things that well, they're yet to come out because I'm creating my courses now. But you talk about intentionally setting aside time, and I know for myself as a survivor, like not being able to set boundaries was and it's still actually a very difficult thing for me to do, because being a shift worker my whole life, it's just like I'll fly by the seat of my pants and kind of hope that things work out, and like self-care kind of goes out the window because you really just don't have the capacity to even look after yourself sometimes. So you're raising a very important point, and you had me at ticking off the to-do list, because as the lovely Shelley, who now works with me, would attest, I am absolutely freaking terrible. I've got more lists and to-do lists than you can focus. You cannot even see my desk. So I think maybe you and Shelley should have a talk. You might be able to sort me out, which is
we might have a little chat offline. No
I
problems.
think I'm going to be put in the naughty corner.
It's really interesting that we talk about that now, don't get me wrong, I feel like I've had this as a natural skill, and even when when I've had interviews about that business or whatever else, prior to that I worked in the events industry, and anyone that works in events knows that you've got to be pretty organized, especially as the event manager. But what I've uncovered over the years, or over the more recent years, is that the likelihood of why I'm so organized is because it's a trauma response. Now, that's not to put doom and gloom against this amazing skill that I have. I'm very mindful that I have monetized this skill and I'm making the most of it. But in my case, being organized meant I could feel like I was in control, and being busy was a really good way of deflecting. So I was busy all the time, and I was organized, and I had another thing on my list and another project and another project. It's probably why I've got so many hats. But what I've learned through many burnouts is that you have to stop and rest. I'm preaching to the converted, aren't I? I can feel it.
I'm just sitting here busting, going, oh my God, like you're just talking about all the things that I do. Like you raise such it's so cool. It's actually really cool. It gives me hope. Oh my God, there's hope.
There's hope. There's totally hope. And it's funny because I call myself a recovering control freak. Like I am recovering perfectionist, recovering people pleaser, all of that stuff that essentially has served me really well for many, because people won't, I talk about this, like if you have the trauma response where you potentially, drink a lot, or you overeat, or you do this or you do that, people will frown, like eventually go, hey, you okay? Or like, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that, or it's frowned upon. But if your trauma response is to be extra busy, take on more projects, take on that other job, always be organized and always be frantically busy, people will reward you for that. They'll give you more work. They'll praise you for being so together and organized. And it's like, well, it's just a palatable trauma response. It's not necessarily healthy. And in my case, I've learned that that's why rest and recovery has to come first, because if I'm rested and my cup is full, then I can actually do the things that I still want to do. Like I want to have all those hats, but I can do them intentionally, and I can also say no to the things that don't serve me.
Wow, I love it. It's really good because I think just maybe it's the police response or whatever, but you're kind of speaking like hallelujahs to me at the moment because it's something I've really struggled with because that is my coping. And you're right. People will reward you for it, but they think you're doing okay. They're like, oh, they're so successful. They're, they're doing this, and forever I've been like, oh, Kel's doing so great. Like, oh, look at all your stuff that you're achieving, and I'm like, mate, I'm surviving. This is me surviving, but you don't kind of know that. You just kind of fall into the trap of keeping on, really.
Yeah.
And maintaining that state of hypervigilance and not even being able to acknowledge that there's something under that because when it gets uncomfortable, you just do something else, right?
Yeah,
I was talking
just
about
add something else to your plate. Yeah.
I was talking about because I'm up to module 5 in recording my Foundations for Freedom. I'm talking about addiction and talking about addictive behaviors, not just substance abuse and stuff like that. It's like all the shit we do that's like harmful and compulsive. So it might even be exercise, or we think, oh, exercise is really good for us. But when it becomes harmful or compulsive and it robs you from, the good things in your life and stuff like that, then it's actually a destructive behavior. We don't see that, and I've fallen into that forever. So anyway, we've like totally jumped the gun. Like we haven't even heard anything about your story. We just got so excited. Well, I just got so excited. You're so in trouble. Shelley and I are keeping you for all of our future plans. So you're stuck now.
I'm just part of the team.
Yep, that's it. We're adopting you. I've got plans for you already. So signing you up.
Sounds pretty good to me.
I love it. So look, I know and look, just share as much as you're willing to share, Caroline, because I know how difficult it is to share about familial abuse, and that's my story as well. So it's pretty rare, and unfortunately, as you and I both know, there's so much talk about institutional abuse and things that happen, in schools and churches, and the 1% and the kid who's potentially abused in a playground or something like that. And it's those occurrences are actually really rare. And 89% of sexual offending is happening behind closed doors with someone who is known to the child, but we just don't talk about it. And I know that coming on here and sharing your story was very courageous, so I thank you in advance. But I just would love for you to share what you're comfortable with, a little about your journey and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, definitely. I really love that you highlight the word institution, as it's something that I definitely speak about a lot. And I agree that, and I respect the fact that we need to talk about large institutions like churches and schools and scout clubs and other institutions like that, because the reality is when an institution is created, a hierarchy of power is in place, and when that power is abused, that's when we see situations of childhood sexual abuse. That's predominantly the topic that I talk about, but I do raise the institution of family because it has the same structure of power. And what makes it even more challenging is it doesn't have there's no external body policing, navigating, monitoring. Like there's no one outside of our families generally that are going to come into our families and have enough say to make significant change. And unfortunately, the power structure internally means that the silence that's created creates further abuse, further cycles for abuse and whatever else. So in my case, I was sexually abused by my father, and that went on right under the noses of my mother and my 2 siblings. It went on for about 4 years, and when it stopped, they still didn't know that it had happened. And it took 2 more years for me to disclose to my mum. Now, due to the overlayer of what I now see to be family violence and coercion, she chose not to leave. And so I remained in our family structure until 3 years ago. So what that means, and this ties into the title of my memoir, is that in many ways, more than one thing was true. So during the abuse itself, I was still a pretty good student. I went to school, I did my stuff, I was pretty busy and organized, and I was this really picture perfect daughter, student, whatever, to the extent that my siblings and my mum didn't know that this was happening right under their noses. Post the disclosure, because I was so high functioning, it was like, oh, well, Caroline's going to be okay. And breaking up this marriage isn't an option, or isn't the option I'm choosing. And so it was kind of this unspoken rule that if I could just get on with it, then we could still be a family. And if we could still be a family, we could still keep pretending that everything was fine. And when there's a power structure at play, as a child and as a teenager and as a young woman and so on and so forth, you kind of just don't know what to choose. When we think about the structure of family and we think about the way that we are supposed to rely on and how we need our parents from the moment we're born, there's this real tug of war that happened for me internally around, well, this is causing harm, but these are the people who feed me, educate me. And in the same breath of the abuse happening, I was being taught about music and art and love and community and volunteering. And so this is the complexity of often the people that are closest to victim survivors, especially children, who play roles in society of that really lovely uncle or coach or whoever, because they're actually pretty good at being fairly decent humans outside of the structure of the abuse. So in my case, I pushed it down and lived in my family structure for decades. And I initially didn't speak up or do anything because I have a younger sister. And I said, well, if we're not leaving, then I need to stick around to make sure nothing happens to her. So I essentially was by her. She was by my side always. And I can say that nothing's ever happened to her. But then by that point, we had lived this life for so long that I was like, well, when do I tell her? How do I tell her? So it took me till 2020 to tell her, which then created a whole new dynamic for our family. And I've since estranged myself from my parents, and my sister and I are still really close. And I have a difficult relationship with my other sibling, but overall, I've come out of that institution of family, and I've had to consciously give up that almost that innate primal Maslow's hierarchy of needs type concept of need of family. I've had to consciously distance myself from that so I can heal, so I can have boundaries, so I can do what I need to do, because both can't exist in the same space. So that's a lot to unpack. So thank you for just breathing through that. It's like that was me condensing a 30-year story into a couple of minutes, but yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. There's obviously in regards to the fact that the abuser is my father, in the fact that my mum chose to stay, being in a household and a family structure for decades. It's a complicated story.
But you so very courageously have shared, and I just appreciate you for doing that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing that. I do think it's really important. I have a lot of women in my support groups and obviously different listeners and things like that constantly struggle with the fact that, like what you're talking about with your mum, that she didn't leave, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maintain that relationship. And often that's a very silencing decision. It's very subconscious, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's part of the grooming process. And a lot
Yeah.
of families, they don't realize that they're also being groomed, right? Like, they don't realize the perpetrators are doing this. My uncle did the same thing. He was a bit like a father figure, I'd say. My mum really relied on his strength to help, because she lost her mother so young, when she was the age of 10. So he was like a big support to our family. Never would have picked that he was grooming us. It wasn't, well, grooming them to get to me. And it's that whole being able to do this under the nose of those other people within the family. And to this, like, so my aunt stayed married to him, and again, a complex story, but went to court and all those types of things, and I had to get a right of reply from her, which revealed that she said she knew nothing about it, even though he pleaded guilty, and still didn't believe him. And I was like, how can you not believe someone who pleads guilty to all these charges? But still stayed married to him. And it really, I think you hit the nail on the head when you're talking about being kind of stuck in this institution, because you it's like, even if you don't have that conversation, the fact that they stay with them is like, they either don't believe you, they're dismissing your truth, and all those types of things. And there's so many women and men, that have this story of their family not believing them and being stuck in an institution that they feel they cannot get out of.
So, and the isolation outside of the institution is deafening. So when you estrange yourself from family, every Mother's Day, every Father's Day, every Christmas, every incidental conversation where someone says, what do parents do? Or where do they live? Or do you live close to them? Or like, all harmless, well-meaning, day-to-day chit-chat. There's no plan for that. So you're constantly navigating the normal world, and also trying not to traumatize people. So if every time someone said, is this like, what are you doing for Christmas? You're going to see your parents? And I go, no, because of this and this and this. Like, that's a punch in the face. Like, it's not a conversation you have at the coffee shop where you're lining up to get your latte. Like, it's like a minefield that you're constantly navigating. You have to pick and choose. Like, when do you tell someone that you're estranged versus changing the subject? And it's really lonely out there, because you're out by yourself. Like, there's a chapter in my memoir where I talk about my island and how it essentially, like, I moved away from the mainland because that's where the institution is. And there's so many people that I love that still live there, but I can't be there. And so when they're like, but we know the truth now, and we've made it as safe as possible for you, please come back and visit. And I'm like, not only can I not come back and visit because all of the landmines that you can't see are there for me, why would I come back? And why are you still there? And so creating an island where it's set on my values, my safety, what I need for my family, so we can start rebuilding, breaking cycles. But some days I'm there with a very small handful of people, and it's lonely. It's full of grief, because I'm grieving people that I could very quickly pick up the phone and say, hey, do you want to catch up? And I'm sure that they would be quite happy to do that. But it just doesn't, there's no alignment there. So, you have to have those really hard boundaries, which can be really lonely.
I think that's really brave, Caroline. I really do. And I often say, like, if you're going to share your story with somebody, they need to make you feel safe, seen, and heard. And that means to listen without judgment and love you without conditions, like, you know, I'm around here and I'll do this and this for you, whatever it is. But often there's always something tied to it, or you have to give something when it comes to family and things like that. Making that really hardline decision to cut somebody off is really fucking brave, especially when it's those close family members. And I talk about it, but I know how hard it is to make that final decision. So I'd love you to share, if you could, and if you feel like you can, about what you do and how you've been able to do that. I know many of the women who are in my support group often talk about still being attached to family and you know, other family members taking other people's sides and not believing them, and I find that really fucking shit. Sorry, but I get really angry because I just don't know how you cannot believe a child. 98% of children seem to be telling the truth. We know this. But it just pisses me, really makes me so angry. So please share what you can about, and to give our listeners maybe some kind of an idea on how to move through those decisions.
I think the first thing I would say is to make sure that the person, the victim survivor, is safe, so that they feel safe and grounded enough to be able to communicate their boundaries. Safety is multifaceted, so it's physical safety as a starting point, but then psychological, emotional, spiritual, if you're a spiritual person. We know the difference between feeling safe and unsafe, and sometimes that needs to be supported with external people in your life. So you may need to estrange yourself from certain people, and in this case we're talking about family, but making sure that there is some support for you, because that's the first really hard part. Is when you're choosing to estrange yourself, you're creating a level of separation and isolation. And if that means that you're moving into a space where you are actually completely alone, you're likely not to feel safe, because as humans, we need others. And so in working out what safe feels like for you, that's probably the first step. So it's a really internal step. Once you establish that safety, you'll likely find more courage to be able to communicate your needs and identify what your values are around maintaining that safety. So if that is that you outright won't see someone anymore or speak to them, then communicate that and be really clear. And that's super tough. I'm not implying that communication is going to be easy, but it needs to be concise. It needs to be really clear, and you need to just know what those boundaries look like. So some people, for example, will say, I don't want to see that person one-on-one, but if we're in a group setting, that's okay, I'll just avoid them. Because they can do that. They can maintain their safety and be in that setting. Some people cannot. And so that's why, once again, going back to what that safety feeling is for you, and remembering that it's yours. So it isn't about making other people comfortable. It isn't about pleasing your auntie or your uncle or your granddad, because granddad's getting old and he's going to be so upset if you're not there. And who the fuck cares? It's not their problem. It's your safety. So work out what that is and then communicate what you need. Make sure that the people that are in your safety net know what those needs are. So if you get the wobbles, they're there to back you and go, hey, remember when you said you weren't going to do this? I'm just checking if that hasn't changed. And if that hasn't changed, I've got you back. You don't need to do the thing you don't want to do. And then reiterating those things over and over and over again, because people cross your boundaries all the time. That's what people do. They just step over those lines because they're imaginary and they're not physically there. So reiterating them, no, sorry, I can't come because I know that person's going to be there, and as I've said to you before, I'm not comfortable being in their space. It's something I need for myself, but thank you for the invitation. or whatever it is. So I definitely have different boundaries with different people. And my mum is probably the person that I probably struggle with the most, because when I was younger, I very quickly mentally and emotionally distanced myself from my dad. So though we were still physically in spaces together at times, we didn't really speak. It was kind of always just swept under the carpet as, oh, they just don't get along or whatever. But my relationship with my mum was still pretty active, and right up until 2020. So that is a huge amount of grief. And so the way that boundary sits is that I am still respectful, and I'll still get, a text message on my birthday or on maybe the birthdays of my children, but she won't ask if she can see us. She's very respectful. I've been clear what the boundary is, and so I'm not trying to cause more harm. I don't actually wish any ill on her. I love her and I terribly miss her, but I also know that I don't feel that she can have it both ways. So she's made it really clear where she stands. I've made it really clear what I need for my safety, and those two things don't align. So yeah, I think you really need to judge every situation, but if you keep coming back to what is best and safe for you, you'll hopefully be able to find what's truest for you, and then it will maybe make it easier. I'm not going to imply that it's easy, because it's just not.
I think you're very courageous, and especially like I think it's really important when there's kids. Like, you've got two beautiful children, and there's always this thing is like, oh, your grandfather wants to get to know the kids, and like, or your dad or whoever, like, they're not going to be able to have this relationship with this person, which is unsafe. But it's almost like this guilt trip of saying, well, they should get to know this person and blah, blah, blah. And so you kind of put in this position that even though you put your boundary there, you said, hey, like, this is what I'm okay with. And then they still push. And I say this, but I haven't actually had to do this because it was just an automatic boundary for us. It was like, that's it. We're cutting off all communication with this person. But when people push that boundary again, after you've said, this is what I need, they're not your people.
Yeah.
They're not your people. When you constantly have to revalidate your boundaries and reassert yourself, it's traumatic to do that. Continually say that over again. And so for me, like, I'm thinking what you're saying, like, I don't know how you've done that. It must have taken so much courage to do that. Because I haven't had to reassert my boundaries. They were just there. It's just like, that's it. We're done. We're never having contact with him again. And I know that must be very difficult for people in my family. I don't know. We don't talk about it, but it's a given. It's just like, well, he's done this, and that's that.
And sometimes it is, and that's amazing. Like, if you've got enough people with you on your island, that's cool. Yeah, I know many people, unfortunately, in the same position as me, and I think time also plays a big part in this. So a lot of people didn't know until about 3 years ago, and so from that perspective, they're like, but I forged a relationship with this person for the last 3 decades, so what do I do now? It's really complicated, and yeah, and I think for me, that was a really big part of, like, I've been talking about child safety, and I've been fundraising for Bravehearts since I can't even remember when, and things like that. But I always felt like a fraud because because I was still living in my family structure. Like, I was still going to Christmas dinner, but I was doing this work, and I was talking about the fact that I had been abused, but I just didn't share from who. So, like, it's really complicated because I hate this saying because I think it's silly, but it's the saying of you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like, that's what I was trying to do. Like, I was like, I want to talk about this because it's been incredibly traumatic for me, but I don't want to lose my family. And so what do? I pretend that I'm fine in this family whilst being very open about the fact that I've experienced childhood sexual abuse. And then the inside of me just kept getting eaten alive because I was like, but how? Like, you're not healing because you're there and you're still the scapegoat and you're still dealing with all this stuff, and you can't heal if you're still being traumatized. So
very important point. Yeah. Like I say, you can't heal in the environment where you were harmed. I think that it's very difficult, and you know, you've made a big decision, and it sounds like you've grown significantly since you've made that decision. And I think you need to do that. You need to cut people off who are going to create toxicity and you know, take you out of this place where you're not going to be able to grow into your full self. Isn't that what perpetrators do to keep you silent? Like, you know, they make you feel like you cannot escape, that you're stuck in this place. And until you cut them off and until you remove yourself, you cannot grow. You don't have a voice. You're unable to speak up, right? And it's the perfect way to keep offending.
Yeah, definitely, very much so. And that's how the institution of family exists. It's like any other institution, it's power. So the person that is in most power dictates what happens. And all the other, they're not innocent bystanders, very much not, but all of the other players in that, they have to choose. And it's like when we look at other systems like patriarchy, it's like, oh, well, why do we have patriarchy? And why are women also in that moment of patriarchy? It's like, well, because some women actually benefit, like certain women of certain statures. When we think about feminism, they sit in very different, like as a woman of color, I sit in a very different rung of the ladder when it comes to my feminism compared to a white woman or a white straight woman or whatever. Like, there's a hierarchy, we know there is. But when we look at the system of patriarchy as an example, it's built in a certain way. It doesn't actually benefit any of us, including men. But what it does is it benefits different people at different points in the ladder. And it's the same in these institutions we're talking about. So yes, someone is benefiting the most, and then someone else is benefiting. And then there's someone at the very bottom who is being abused and exploited and utilized to keep the system running. And we see that in all institutions. And so I think when we talk about abuse in institutions, when we forget to talk about family because it's so uncomfortable, we're missing a really big chunk of the data of children that are being abused.
Absolutely. I have so many things I want to talk to you about. My goodness.
You're like, the time is running out.
Sorry. Because I'm just like, Jesus, like, well, I can't say I hear you on the woman of color because I'm like very white, but I have a like little black lady in there somewhere, I swear.
Probably.
You know, I lived in America for a few years, and I have some amazing African American friends and some beautiful Indigenous men and women who are my friends in Australia, and I see the struggles, and I would love to get you and potentially some other women, men of color, like different races and from different demographics to all come on. And I really want to talk about that as well. It's on my list, I swear, because it is such a, like, there's so much happening with our First Nations people, and I really, you know, want to crack that as well. We'll get there for sure. But I really want to know about what else could be true. Like, did I say that right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So the title is More Than One Thing Can Be True. And yeah, so when I started, wait, before I jump in, did you have another question? You look like you're about to say
questions. I got popcorn brain for a reason here, my friend. Like
Was there
Like all the
was there
things we
something specific,
like,
or shall I just
let's go
share?
into the institution of family. Let's talk about what else could be true. Let's talk about like what it's like to be a woman of color. Like, let's get into feminism. Like, come on, let's go. We've got
Just
5
smash the
minutes.
patriarchy. Let's do that in 5 minutes. Okay, yeah. So the title of my memoir is "More Than One Thing Can Be True," and I was deciding to write, which was pretty therapeutic, I must say, and incredibly hard to do at the same time. So at the start of 2020, I decided that I was going to disclose to my sister. And do you remember the movie The Truman Show?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's when I write about her in my book, she's Truman in our life. So we had created this entire world around her where everyone knew and she didn't know. So she has this perfect life as such. It's still built in a space full of trauma, but she's Truman. So we were all designed for her to be happy. And so as I am going through my life and experiencing this ongoing trauma and have experienced this abuse, she is, has a great relationship with my dad, has a wonderful relationship with both of my parents, is like always really happy and well adjusted. And so there's just all of these other elements that are happening along what I'm experiencing. And I'm creating that for her because in choosing not to tell her and choosing to protect her, I wanted her to have a life that was really different to mine. Eventually, at the end of that movie, spoiler alert, if you're planning to watch the movie, Truman gets to Truman gets to the end of this giant dome that is the studio that he lives in, and he exits. And so when I write about this, I say, as opposed to my sister exiting the Truman Show, I literally push her out the door when I disclose to her. And then what do? We're in the real world and we're navigating that. And that's just one piece, that's just one take of more than one thing being true, because in our lives, so for example, my father gave me away. I've been married twice. My father gave me away at my first wedding. Now, that doesn't make sense to anyone today that knows me, but anyone that knew me back then was like, yeah, of course he did. You guys were like a really lovely, happy family. Whilst there was all this other trauma from my childhood. So this is what I'm saying about more than one thing can be true. And in the same way that my father taught me about music and art and philosophy and some of my most cherished values as a human being actually came from my parents because of the way I was raised, because of the things they taught me. I was also sexually abused in my family, and I was also traumatized significantly by being made to stay within that family structure and being made to stay silent for close to 30 years. And both of those things are true. And I think when we can, they're really hard truths to get your head around, but when we can start thinking about the multiple truths that exist for all of us, like even when we're talking about all the hats I wear, like they're all true. But some days I do one thing and some days I do another, and some days I maybe do 2 or 3 at once, but they're all true. When we can start to accept that more than one thing can be true, and when we can start to accept that survivors can be more than one thing and therefore perpetrators can be more than one thing, we can start hopefully dismantling this picture we have of what a survivor is supposed to look like. Like, I'm supposed to be a mess right now, but the perpetrator is also supposed to be some ogre under the bridge. So when we stop thinking like that and we start seeing people as complex as they are, we can start actually dismantling and deciding what we do with that information, because I don't believe that perpetrators are just born perpetrators. So something's happening, something's wrong in the system. And I think when we start looking at the multiple truths and looking at what potentially goes wrong and looking at why someone abuses their power, we can hopefully start making changes, because right now the way we're trying to change things isn't really working. Like, we're not seeing a dramatic spike or change in this data. We're seeing pretty consistent data year in, year out. But our social thoughts around the good people and the bad people, that hasn't changed. And in the same way that some people out there will look at my dad, meet him, not know anything about him, and think he's the most lovely, good guy ever, some people will look at me and think that I'm the most polished together person they've ever met. And I've got some shit going on sometimes. Like, it's not great all the time, because I'm a high functioning trauma survivor. So yeah, the reason for the title, the reason for unpacking my story whilst also sharing a range of other research and other bits and pieces, is because I want to help people rethink how they think about this stuff. I want to help them unpack it, maybe start again, and hopefully we can try to do something different.
I love it. When I saw that, I was just like, it actually echoed my friend Justine Dean, who's also a survivor and a coach. She's amazing. She does this thing to me all the time. She's like, "Oh, come on, Kel, what else could be true?" And I'm like, "Oh, for fuck's sake!" And so she makes me think, right? And so she's like,
"It hurts your brain."
Oh, I know, it's so annoying, but I guess, like, when I think of that, and I think this is the hopeful part for survivors, is when you start thinking of your limiting beliefs, right? All the things that the perpetrators said to you, and this is your fault, like making you feel like you were complicit in it, or you want this, see, you like this, don't you? Like, making you think all these things. So there's this like shame, right? And you have this internalized belief about this. And when you start asking the question, what else could be true? You start to look as an adult and go, well, actually, I was really brave. That's true. I was really brave. And what else could be true is, well, they were lying to me and convincing me that I needed to do this. And what else could be true is I'm brave, and I'm not a coward, and all the other things that we don't think of outside of our trauma response, because all we're doing is we're digging into this place. So many of us are PTSD, right? PTSD has symptoms of being hyperfixated, being unable to sort of, like, once you start thinking about something, you kind of really struggle to not think about the thing, right? And that's one of the things, right? So you start thinking about this belief, this thing in your head, and you can't stop thinking about it. So as soon as you can break that and say, hey, what else could be true? That was your line. What else could be true? Then you can start opening up the possibilities that there's other things out there. And we really do get hyperfixated and really stuck in these cycles of thinking, and we trap ourselves. We really trap ourselves.
We do.
I just love all the things you shared tonight about you're just so freaking brave. Like, I can't wait to get to know you and learn more about your story, and definitely going to have to get you back. We've still got 10 minutes to talk about the 500 other things that
we don't have enough time.
No, that just means you have to come back. But yeah, I just think it's so courageous, and there's definitely a lot in that, especially around the institution of family, and very exciting. So next fortnight, so in 2 weeks' time, I have John Rouse coming on this podcast, and we are going to smash open this topic as well. I'm very scared, and
we were like 50 minutes in. You're doing really well. You were worried about this one, so you're going to be fine.
There's so many places I want to go, but I'm kind of like, how far do I push it? Because there's so many things within this that, like, here's a really good example. So I put a post up recently, and the question was, what did you need to hear when you were a child, right? At that point of you wanting to speak up, right? The part where you wanted to tell your mum, the part where I wanted to tell my mum, say, hey, like, I feel really yucky. I'm so confused. What is this? Like, I don't understand. And I remember looking at my mom, and like, it's just this pleading with my eyes and hoping that she could kind of read my eyeballs.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you do that? Did you just look at her and be like, can you not? I'm telling you right now. Can't you subconsciously hear what I'm saying?
Wouldn't that be great if people could read our minds?
And I'm just thinking, I told you.
I told you telepathically.
Oh, I told you. You know, but it is that deep longing inside of us of wanting to be saved, but not knowing how to have a voice, right? Like, and I don't allow myself to go there because it fucking hurts, right? Because it's that point where you're like, all of us as little children still need to hear those things at that moment as adults, right? And when we forget that when we're in crisis as an adult, when we're hurting as an adult, we still need that loving and that nurturing from the people in our world. And if the people in our world cannot give us that, they are not the right fucking people.
Yeah.
It is really, really shit that we allow people in our life that can't do that for us. I'm so guilty of it. I have sabotaged the shit out of myself by allowing people into my life who rob from me, who steal away the joy and my direction and my vision and all my trauma coping shit. When I'm like, fucking, you shouldn't be like that, shouldn't. All the projects that I do, and I'm like, well, now I'm using them, so suck that up. I said I was going to write a book, and fucking, here's another project you're going to do. Well, here's my book. There you go. I've written one now. What do you do about that? I'm like, should I show you? I'll show you.
Yeah, I totally get it. And that's the thing. Yeah, we do. Because we make decisions that aren't from our point of safety. We make decisions because they're for other people, not for us.
That's right. And we're scared, and we don't really know the path. We don't know a path when we feel like we're alone. And, some of those things are like, I don't know. What did you need to hear? Like, I needed to know I was going to be safe. And, I love you, and you're not going to be in trouble. Like, you're not going to, that was the biggest thing. You're not going to get in trouble. Yeah. You did nothing wrong. Right. Yeah. Especially because it's like my uncle, like, and for you, freaking dad, like, I just.
Yeah, I totally know where you're coming from. And to be honest, I don't know what I needed. Like, yes, generally, there's a lot of things that are pretty obvious that I needed to hear. I think for me, what was interesting wasn't necessarily thinking about what I needed to hear back then. It was when both of my boys turned 10 and became the age I was when the abuse started. But I was like, oh, wait, what? Like, it was hard when both of my boys were born. That was definitely a really difficult time. But when my children reached the age I was, and what's interesting is that because there's a big gap between my boys, but when my eldest reached that age, I was still in that family structure. So it was difficult, but it wasn't insightful. It was just triggering, and then I just dealt with it. When my youngest turned 10 was also the same month that I released my memoir. Now, I didn't actually do that on purpose. It just kind of happened that way. But the reckoning that happened with me as I, was hosting his 10th birthday party, and I was like, his friends, some girls were there that he was friends with from prep, and I was looking at them going, they're so small. Like, 10-year-olds are really small, and they're so innocent, and they trust me because they'd known me for like quite a few years at that point, and they were all his close friends. And I remember just looking at these little girls going, how does that happen to someone so small and so innocent and so beautifully wonderful and just full of life? That's the stuff that gets me when and like, as I said, like, that was a moment where I was like, oh, this is really hard, acknowledging that, because that's when I see myself in those moments, and I'm like, just the sheer tininess of a 10-year-old and knowing that power imbalance. So yeah, I think what's been interesting, especially as I said with my youngest son, is speaking to those young kids and going, you guys are amazing. And how amazing is it that you can use your voices and you trust us? And like just trying to embed all of that consent discussion, open discussions, looking out for your friends, looking out for when something doesn't seem right. So when the fairly average kid starts being a high achiever, that could also be a red flag. Just like, it's not them necessarily getting in trouble that's always the red flag. It's just unusual behavior. It's the one that's always super quiet because they want to fly under the radar because there's some shit going down in their life. So they're probably the things I think about more often than not. I've come to a real peace when it comes to acknowledging my younger self. I think there was definitely a stage where I used to be angry at my younger self, or I used to be disappointed, or that she didn't speak up earlier, that she didn't do something, that she didn't say something, like all of those things that a lot of survivors, really negative things or things we've heard from perpetrators or whatever. But yeah, I now look at my younger self or photos of my younger self and I'm just so freaking proud of her, because if she didn't fight as hard as she did, I wouldn't be here. Like if she didn't do the groundwork, and then, the 12-year-old and the 14-year-old and the 20-year-old and the 30-year-old, they didn't do that freaking hard work, I wouldn't be able to sit here and easily talk about trauma. Like that's years, that's decades of different versions of me showing up and doing the really hard work to keep me going, because not everyone is blessed with that. Not some people just, they've got to check out and that's just where they're at. And we know in our survivor community, not everyone can fight for this long. And so, yeah, that's the relationship I have with the younger versions of me.
Wow. I just thank you for that. I'm proud of her too.
Yeah.
I'm proud of her too. And I'm proud of you. I don't think we really hear that enough, to think of where you've come and what you've achieved. Like you've done TV, magazines, like you've done heaps of stuff, mate. You should be really proud of how far you've come.
Thank you.
Okay. People can get us. Oh, we got
pretty.
Insert emoji with like exploding. That's what's going on here for a second. So, tell us really quickly. So, guys, we've only got a few minutes left. If you're listening, and Caroline's running an event this weekend on the Gold Coast. So, I'd love you to just chat really briefly about that. Yeah. And I'll pop up this QR code while you do
that. So the event is on Saturday at 1:00 at QT on the Gold Coast. It is all around survivor support. So anyone can come. They don't have to be a victim survivor. So it's just, if you want to be a better human and you know that you might have put your foot in your mouth, you might not understand things like that analogy of the island. You might not even know what a good boundary is or how to support someone when they're maintaining their boundary. Those are the kind of things that I'll be talking about. So there's a few key points that I want to share with people, and just so they can just be better at this, because it just takes practice, because we put our foots in our mouths all the time because we're just human and we're trying really hard. And so if you have the right intentions, that's great, but sometimes it takes a bit of tweaking because we're talking about really sensitive topics. So that's on Saturday, and tickets are available till 5:00 Friday, which is tomorrow. Oh my God, the weekend's going to be here before we know it.
All right. So guys, if you want to grab a ticket, if you're local, please do that. Jump on that. I just really, really quickly, Caroline, is there anything that you want to share with our listeners before we sign off for the night? Any key messages that you'd like to share with our survivors, or even those who support them?
I think I'm just going to answer Claire's question. What time on Saturday? 1 o'clock. 1 till 4 on Saturday. Key messages.
Putting you on the spot, mate.
If as you try to look at what is safest for you, what you want to have as those foundations to move forward, embrace your whole self. You are genuinely more than one thing. Even if you are a mum and you have a day job and you like to go to the gym, there's 3 things. Like, I'm sure there's more. So we've all done stuff we're not necessarily proud of. We've all made mistakes. We've all got things that we wish we hadn't have done or said or whatever else. And embracing all of that, our wholeness. And then when we look at who we are as a full package, we can, make better decisions about who we want to be and who we're becoming and what decisions we're making. And we can also have a look at what we know and what we need to unlearn and what we want to learn more about. Then when you work out what you want to know more about and what boundaries you have, then that's the path. Make sure you got some awesome people by your side.
100%.
Call out to the survivor community. If you don't have anyone in your day-to-day life, Kel and I, we've got your back. Like, there are people like us that have got your back 100% because we get it. And yeah, so that's probably it. Just show up fully, embrace all the sides of yourself, even the ones that are the darkest, and that will be a really great foundation for moving forward.
Oh, that's beautiful, Carolyn. I totally echo all of those sentiments. So thank you so much for being brave and courageous and sharing. Just fantastic. I can't wait to get you back. It sounds like we've got 499 things to talk about.
I think Claire. Yeah, exactly. I can see Claire, if you can't use the QR code, if you just head to my website or even just message me and I'll send you the link.
Beautiful.
It's really, yeah, we'll get you there.
Guys, just really quickly, if you haven't already, so just letting you know, so my free ebook, Reclaim Your Freedom, you can get that now. It is 8 cycle-breaking strategies for survivors of child sexual abuse. So it's kind of like all the shit you need to do before you dig into your healing, right? So it's kind of like learning to speak up and, you'll get a video and it'll come as an email. And yes, I will get your email address, but there's a good reason for that. And I honestly, it's actually really good. And I'm not saying that because I wrote it. I'm saying that because other people read it and said it was good, right? So please jump on that. It's free. You don't have to pay anything. So if you haven't got it already, jump on that and do that. And guys, 2 weeks time, I will have the amazing John Rouse. If you don't know who John, he's actually currently the Victims Commissioner for Australia. He's a retired detective inspector. He's worked for Argos for years, like 30 plus years, 40. I'm going to get it wrong and be completely embarrass myself, but he is probably the leading child protection advocate in Australia right now. Every time I talk to him, I'm both inspired and also scared shitless at the same time. So if you want to be part of that conversation, if you want to know how things really are, please join us in 2 weeks' time. The more the merrier. Please share the event when you see it come out, guys. It's going to be a very, very powerful conversation. So, yeah, we'll see you again very shortly. Caroline, thank you so much again for joining us tonight. Powerful, powerful conversation. And we will see you guys all again soon. Thank you for being part of Off the Cuff with